Welcome to Diced Onion, a Warrior podcast. We're your hosts. I'm Angelo Fioris. That's Mike Haggerty. Welcome again to another edition of our podcast, which we hope you guys are enjoying. We appreciate everybody who has tuned in and participated and commented and enjoyed our work. We're having a lot of fun putting it together, aren't we, Mike?
Oh, having a blast. This is so rewarding and get to talk about our favorite show. I mean, how does it get better than that?
It doesn't get any better, and getting to rewatch these episodes, which are just each one like their own little masterpiece in a sense, and revisiting them with a different set of eyes, more from this sort of critical standpoint where we're retelling the story in some ways, has been a very fun experience for sure.
It's kind of like a book club. I think of it that way. That we're analyzing it, and I enjoy the sort of the analysis and discovering, because you discover new things, and that's always very rewarding too. You can, just like you reread a book or
Right.
rewatch any show or movie. I mean, even like 50 years later, I can rewatch The Godfather and still find something new.
I
So
find things new all the time in shows or series or movies that I've watched dozens and dozens of times, and then something dawns on me and I say, how did I miss that before? Like in The Sopranos, I just realized that the girl that Adriana rats out that was hitting on Christopher is the same girl that was in the Mustang Sally when he beat the guy with the golf club. I've been watching The Sopranos for 20 years, and that just dawned on me like a month ago.
I had no idea.
There you go.
Yes, you can always find, you're never too old to learn. That's the point.
That's true. That's true. We are too old for other things, though.
Yeah, probably. Yeah.
All right, let's get on with it. The people aren't watching to hear us jibber jabber about nonsense. So let's talk about season 1, episode 4 of Warrior. This episode is called The White Mountain. It originally aired on April 26, 2019. And the opening sequence, there is Bill at the roulette table. We got the hint that he was a gambler a couple of episodes back, Mike, when Leary was able to own him for not being able to pay back his debts. But now we're seeing Bill at his last nickel here, isn't he?
Yeah, we learned a lot about Bill in this episode. I feel like this was kind of a, I don't want to say it was a Bill episode, because there certainly was other things going on, but we got a good taste of Bill and a good sense. We saw how deep his gambling addiction goes, which anytime I watch this show, I think about, okay, we're in the 19th century here. So what did they think about gambling addiction or alcoholism or opium addiction, I guess, in this case?
Right.
So in the 19th century, they were looking at it with, speaking of different eyes, they were looking at it with different eyes.
Right.
So to them, I'm curious. I mean, I guess there's no way to really know 100%, because gambling addiction probably wasn't even a thing then, but clearly Bill has a gambling addiction.
Well, it was a thing, but it wasn't classified as such. You were probably
That's what I meant. Like,
you were probably just a degenerate back then.
Yeah,
They probably still are degenerates, but at least it's an illness now for classification purposes. But anyway, Mike, Bill loses his last nickel, and there he is doing the quintessential gambler's walk of shame on the way out. And as he heads out, he sees the cashier's cage, and he tries to get a marker. For those who are not so familiar with the gambling vernacular, a marker is in essence money being fronted to you so you can continue gambling. So Bill now wants to gamble with money he doesn't have, and he's not having any success getting a response from the cashier until some familiar face, to him at least, shows up.
yeah, Mr. Damon, who's going to turn out to be an interesting character. He's also unique in that he's an onion. I'm sorry, he's a duck working for the onions, which we
Right.
haven't seen a lot of that.
Right. He's a white guy working for the Chinese. He's also, we learned quickly, an ex-cop from San Francisco, went to Chicago, tried his hand as a Pinkerton. For those of you that don't know, Pinkerton was like a detective agency. They're probably still around, but they were like the premier detective agency in the U.S., probably from the mid-1850s or something like that. And so he and Damon know each other, and they're having a little conversation as he finds out that Jack Damon works in the casino. And so he asks Damon if they can stake him.
And he's all too happy to do that. And we find out why eventually, but he's all too happy to do it. And he gives him the money, and we see that Bill is kind of on a roll now. He's doing, his luck has changed.
Yeah. He asks Damon for before we get to the table real quick, he asks Damon for some money for a marker, and Damon says, sure. Will a 50 do? $50? And Bill says, sure. And they give him $50. I went and did the research. $50 in 1878 is $1,500 today. So now you think about that. And that's a staggering sum of money 140 years ago.
Yeah, and just put, I mean, if you go by today's standards, but what you just said, $1,500, if someone fronts you $1,500, if you're, say, the average working person, that's a lot of money too.
Yeah, it's big bucks. So now let's go back to where you set the stage, which is Bill's going on a heater now. Things are rolling his way, the roulette wheel, the dice, whatever it was he was playing. And here comes Mr. Damon and checks out Bill's stack of chips there.
And he sees that he's doing quite well, and he gives him some friendly advice by saying, maybe now would be a good time to walk away. And Bill agrees. But after his hot streak is over.
Yeah, we're going to wait till this action cools a bit. And the problem with, again, the quintessential gambler is the action never cools enough until it's ice cold. And just like the degenerate gambler, there's Bill down to one chip left on the roulette wheel. And he decides not to spin it and puts it in his pocket, the last coin.
So I guess he did get a little profit that evening. I don't know.
That ain't profit. That just minimizes barely his bet. In fact, the phrase he uses when that last spin happens, he looks at the stick man and he says, I think I'm done. Now, that could mean a whole lot of things aside from just his gambling. And then this is when Mr. Damon comes on back to set the record straight with Bill as to what's going to happen next.
Yep, and Mr. Damon escorts him outside, and there's people out there waiting for them, and they proceed to beat up Bill, and they know they can
pre-beat him. Before he defaults, they pre-beat him. It's like Mo the bartender trying to break Homer's legs before he lent the money. Do you remember that one?
Oh yeah, or like when they're tossing the drunks out of the bar. Oh, Detroit style, very nice.
Right.
Sorry, that's a Simpsons reference there. If some of you get that.
So back to Damon and Bill. Like you said, they're beating up Bill here, and while he's beating him, he's explaining the Feng Hai, who is the Tong that Damon works for, and they're actually Mongolians. They think they're descended from Genghis Khan, and he describes exactly what is waiting for Bill if he crosses the Feng Hai / Genghis Khan descendants.
And the Feng Hai are going to feature prominently in this week's episode. And just a quick side note, because I remember, since you brought it up, I remember reading this, and this is a fact, that there is a high percentage of people in China that are actually descended from Mr. Khan.
Oh, I believe it.
An alarming amount of people. And so Mr. Khan, he got around. So I could believe that the Feng Hai could be descended from him. That actually kind of makes sense in a way.
While we're still here in the opening scene of the episode, we do also learn the genesis of the episode's title, which is where Jack explains to Bill what the White Mountain is. And in essence, to cut to the chase, it's a fable, right, which says that the enemies of Genghis Khan went towards the mountain, and it was all the bones of his previous enemies, so they knew what they were up against. So essentially, he's saying to Bill, you're going to be part of that White Mountain of bones if you don't pay up in 2 weeks. I believe he then says, I'll give you the policeman special 3 weeks. So Bill's not the only degenerate cop if he's giving him the policeman special.
No, clearly they have dealt with cops before. That implies that they have dealt with police officers. It implies that they have a varied clientele at the Feng Hai Casino.
So we learn here that it's Damon's job to collect from the ducks out in the pond. He also explains I can go where the Chinese can't, which is why when an Irishman scurries off with a debt, I'm able to reel him back in, right? And
now we know Damon's appeal to the Feng Hai, why they want it. And now we see why they work together, because he can do things that they can't. Because even if you are, I guess, for the Feng Hai, even as dangerous as they are, they still can't cross those lines.
That's right. And that is where this is just the opening scene we're still on, Mike. And it ends with Bill giving Damon the big F you at the end. He says, F you, Damon, and 3 weeks, Bill. And that's how the scene ends. We come back from the credits. We find Officer Lee sleeping. We see his badge number is 42. I couldn't find any significance in that Maybe it was like a subtle Jackie Robinson reference, since Lee seems to sort of understand the plight of the blacks in that time, being that he was from the South. I don't know. I'm just spitballing on that one. But that's all we see of Lee for the moment. He's sleeping. But we're back now at the Hopway headquarters.
Yep, and they're having breakfast. And
Correct.
Bolo is we see Bolo again. He's there, and he's enjoying a hearty breakfast. We find out Bolo's backstory a little bit.
I like this backstory of Bolo, and we kind of had the sense that he was a badass, but in this part of the episode, we learn exactly how badass he is.
Yeah, he was involved in some underground fight. Speaking of gambling, in some underground fighting
In Utah.
In Utah. That's right. And his job was not too unlike a gladiator. He would fight other workers or slaves, whatever the case may be, and then he would look up and see what they decide once he's bested his opponent, thumbs up or thumbs down. Which, by the way, historically, we think that the thumbs down in ancient Rome meant that the person got killed. It was actually the opposite.
Oh, was
if
it?
the emperor gave the thumb,
like
he gets killed. And thumbs down, he doesn't get killed. We always get that wrong.
Of course we got it wrong, naturally. I was today years old when I learned that, Mike. Thank you.
You're welcome. I learned that when I saw Gladiator 20 years ago.
I saw Gladiator 20 years ago and I didn't learn it. So there you go.
Anywho, so we see that, and he's called the Yellow Demon. I think, was that it?
Yeah, he's the Yellow Demon. We find out that his name's the Yellow Demon, and he cleans up everybody in the, I guess, underground Utah fight league.
Right. And then we find out that how he came to be with the Hopwee. Father June heard of him, traveled to Utah, saw him fight, and he bought him. And then they asked, well, how did he buy him? And then, well, Bolo makes it clear once again, we find out, reiterated, that Father June owns your ass. Everyone is owned in the Hopwee.
Yeah, your ass, just like mine, belongs to Father June, and all of ours does. The scene ends. Assam's getting ready to leave, and Bolo says to him, hey, maybe it's time for you and me to go a couple of rounds. We already know Bolo doesn't like him. He's itching for a little scrap with Assam, and Assam has a great line here, doesn't he?
Yeah, he says, do I look crazy?
Yeah, fight the Yellow Demon. Do I look crazy? So he in a backhanded way sort of gives respect to Bolo, but I don't think there's any respect behind that comment at all. He just doesn't, he's got better things to worry about right now than Bolo's personal issues.
Oh yeah, no, he's clearly not afraid of Bolo. He's just not wanting to deal with that right now, and that's why he kind of gave him, like you said, a little backhanded respect there. A little respect, little wise ass comment, but a little bit of both. So
now we fast forward to the police headquarters, and here comes Buckley limping his way into Flanagan's office. R.E. Assam's release. And he explains to the chief that it's time to send a message. The mayor's intent is for the authorities of San Francisco to send a message to the Chinese community. And he gives the chief a piece of paper, Mike.
Yeah, it looks like a business card. And at the moment, we don't know what that is. When I first saw that, I was like, was this some sort of blackmail information on the chief? Wasn't sure. We're going to find out. But it was interesting how that scene played out.
Yeah.
Because they kept you guessing.
They do keep you guessing. You don't know exactly what's on that piece of paper. We now cut back to Long Z headquarters. I guess it's headquarters. And there's Li Yang. At first, I thought he was training while he was scrapping with these up to 4 guys here, right? But he cleans up 3 of them, knocks them out with relative ease. He doesn't really have a lot of problem with these 3 dudes. And there's one guy left standing, and he just takes off running. He doesn't even want to scrap with Li Yang at this point. And that reminded me of a scene. I don't remember which Bruce Lee movie it was, but there's been several of them where Bruce Lee beats up a multitude of guys, and it's always the last guy left who like drops his knife and takes off. And so that's what that reminded me of when that last guy took off. Dawned on me, Mike, at the end of the scene that this wasn't training. This was them trying to vet some new recruits. Remember, the war's coming, and Li Yang said episode ago, we need some new recruits because the Hopway is ramping up their recruitment. So obviously, these guys are not up to snuff. No. And clearly they are preparing for war, and they are looking for a few good men, so to speak. And so far, there's very few to be found. Yeah, and this scene is pretty straightforward. This is just sort of giving you an idea of the war that is to come. And we also, we're going to find out more from Mei-Ling about the war in this episode.
But yeah, this scene to me was pretty straightforward, just testing out some recruits. And it's very quick, just kind of giving you an idea of what's coming.
Right. We now see Assam and Young Jun. They're hanging out together. They're sitting outside smoking an opium joint. And go ahead.
You know what? I'm actually because all right. Granted, I don't know a lot about this, but he was getting high. But Young Jun said it was because of molasses. Does I mean we've all eaten pies and cakes? Can molasses make you high?
Molasses is street for opium.
Oh, okay.
You're today years old when you learn that. So there's a kiss of molasses means just a little bit of opium in the cigarette or the joint or whatever it was that he rolled. And while they're sitting back, kind of mellowing out, Young Jun talks about when he got skinned in. Of course, Assam's still sort of recuperating from his injuries of the beatdown he took from Father Jun a week ago. And we learned from Young Jun that Father Jun broke 2 bones in his own hand, skinning in his son.
Yeah, and obviously
That's
proving
wild.
that Father Jun doesn't play favorites. And I took this scene as more as Young Jun trying to fortify his relationship with Assam and maybe feel him out a little bit, because I got the sense that not everyone is 100% sure about Assam yet, including Young Jun at this point. I think Young Jun is trying to see where he's going. Even at the end of the scene, when Assam says, "I'm just going to go walk around," he goes, "All right, well, don't go disappearing or don't run away again."
Right,
Like,
right.
It's all about tightening the reins, I think, and that's what this was to me. Like a little subtle. Young Jun was sending him a subtle signal, saying again, much like actually now I think about it, what Bolo was saying at breakfast was, "You belong to us."
Right. And he does say it at one point. He asks Assam, "Why are you in America?" And he says, "To find a girl." And Young Jun says, "I knew it." But Assam responds, "She's dead."
Yeah, and he's doing that to protect his sister and himself.
Yeah. And here's the answer that Young Jun gives him. Back to your point. He says, "And now you're skinned in. Sucks for you." So it's like you came all this way to find a girl. You found out she's dead. We know she's not. But Young Jun says, "And now you're skinned in." Sort of like you came here all this way and now you're stuck. And so that's where Assam is. We've gotten a status update. He is stuck.
And let's just let me backtrack here a little bit too, because in part where Young Jun says to him, he goes, "Why would you cross the salt? A fighter like you could do okay in China. You
Right.
wouldn't need to come here." And that's how they found out that he came here for a girl. And Assam clearly is not going to give away all the information, because now that he's skinned in, this is a very complicated scenario for him.
Yeah.
He's basically, he's not. He's related to the leader of their rival.
And this is the point where, like you said, he's still trying to feel out Assam, and he's trying to establish trust. He says to Assam, "You can trust me, right?" "I know," Assam says, but I don't believe Assam buys that.
No, it's clear that Assam doesn't clearly trust them either. There's no one really trusts anyone here yet, and that's what keeps the tension up. That's what keeps it interesting.
Yeah, and that's exactly
sorry.
right. And just as it couldn't get any, just for another twist, Jacob, Mrs. Blake's, the mayor's wife's assistant or servant, appears, and Assam spots him and leaves to follow him. And that's when he says, don't go into the duck pond or stay close by." And that's where that scene ends. But with Jacob showing up and Assam following him, I got the feeling that advice has already fallen on deaf ears, Mike.
Yeah, clearly it has. Assam is going to do his thing, and even Penny's assistant is going to do his thing, or he's going to do what he's required to do.
Yeah, it's interesting. People are following either they're following orders or they're following their heart here, right? And Assam is kind of not wanting to do one, but wanting to do the other. And I find that sort of an interesting contrast there.
Yeah, the conflict.
Yeah, the conflict. All right. We got Mei-Ling and Chow now. They're in Chow's place. We know he's, a dealer of arms. And here he is trying to sell Mei-Ling one of the little sleeve guns that you hide right under your sleeve.
Yeah, and I was, when I saw that, I was trying to think, did this remind me more of like a James Bond, or what was that old show, Wild Wild West?
Yeah, Wild West. Yeah.
I'm dating myself here, old man, with Robert Conrad.
Oh, yeah. Robert Conrad was great. Of course, he was in Black Sheep Squadron. He was also, he's the guy, if you're old enough to remember like us, he had the Energizer battery on his shoulder, daring you to knock it off. For those of you too young, look it up on YouTube, Robert Conrad Energizer. You'll see, iconic back in the day. But yeah, it's kind of James Bond. It's very Q in a sense, right? Isn't that his name in the Bond movies?
Yeah,
The guy
he's
who
always
shows
getting
him all
James
his,
Bond the way, and I chuckle. This actually might have been my favorite scene in the whole of this episode,
yeah,
because yeah, there definitely was that James Bond vibe. Like, oh,
yeah.
Chow, we knew, we're used to seeing Chow selling blades and standard weapons, but yeah, this cool sleeve gun. I don't know if that actually existed at that point,
Good
but
question.
yeah, and that might be something to put in the Google machine to check and
Right.
see what comes out of that one. When was a sleeve gun invented? Because that was pretty cool. I like that.
Mei-Ling, however, is not really there for sleeve guns. She's got other
No,
things on her mind.
unfortunately,
Yeah,
I would be there for sleeve guns.
I'm all in. Take me to Chow's for a sleeve gun now. But Mei-Ling is not interested in that. She's interested in another service of Chow's, which is that as a power broker. And she asks him to set up, back to the Feng Hai, a meeting with the Feng Hai. And he's not really interested in doing that, but she insists, and she insists that he set it up ASAP.
Yeah, he says that they were the reason why the Great Wall in China was built to keep them out.
Great line, by the way.
So,
but ultimately, he does acquiesce and tell her that he is going to set up the meeting for her. So here we are now, back to Bill's house, and Lee is there, and Mrs. O'Hara is not happy, is she? Because Bill, of course, is all beat up from his earlier scene with Jack Damon.
yes, and his wife suspects that something is going on. I don't know if she suspects what it actually is, because she's still kind of berating him for why is he working the night shift when he's, that should be a rookie shift.
Right,
and
or for an underling.
Right, and I wasn't sure if she was really believing it. I'm not sure if she really actually did believe it or not. That's something I'm going to debate internally. But Lee was there to sort of, I get the sense that he almost was trying to bring the heat down, was kind of calming her down. He was backing O'Hara up, but then he himself had an interesting line once. Well, what did he say? You're too proud to. Oh gosh, I'm trying to remember. What
he used one of his down home expressions that he uses.
Oh,
I forget what it was.
You're too poor to paint, too proud to whitewash.
Right. And she just looks at him completely not buying that either. There's no way. She knows something's amiss. And let me tell you something, Mike. A gambler's wife knows. A liar's spouse also knows. So she knows something's going on there. And she, I don't think that she suspects Lee as being complicit necessarily, but she's also not necessarily buying into whatever it is that he has to say. So now Bill is in so much pain, he needs Lee to help him put on his socks. He's all banged up.
Yeah, and this is a bit of a bonding moment, but at the same time, we see that Lee's sort of in the same category as O'Hara's wife, because he goes, I could have sworn, I forget the cop's name, so-and-so was on duty last night. And O'Hara basically tells him to STFU in so many words.
Yeah, and I wrote those letters again on my screen, STFU. The scene now shifts, and it's Jacob and Assam, and they're out on the street, right? And Jacob tells Assam that it's not a good idea to follow him. And does Assam listen?
Of course not. No, of course not.
Of course not. So he says, just take me to your duck lady, right?
Mm-hmm. And I like this. This scene was just a quick little setup scene. This was just a little something just to get the story moving. But it's interesting. It's showing you that there's interest between Assam and Penny. We saw some tension, some maybe romantic tension between them last week, and we're going to see that obviously there is some interest, at least on Assam's part of this point.
Yeah, there's no question Assam is on his way to Penny's, but before we see that, we see Buckley coming to work, and he's looking for the mayor, and he's not there. He turns to the secretary, says, where the hell is she? And she sheepishly sort of looks down at the floor. Buckley immediately knows what that means, and we might have a sense of what that means, and that gets confirmed instantly, doesn't it?
Yeah, and now we find out what that business card was about.
Yeah, it was, I guess, the site of the staged raid, part of the message the mayor and Buckley want to send to the Chinese. However, it's a brothel, and we already know the mayor's proclivity to the Chinese brothels. And sure enough, Buckley bursts in on a room, and who do we find?
We find Mayor Blake, and he's there with a young woman, and It looks like she's giving us some discipline.
He's well, look a little closer. He's bent over a chair. Okay. But if you look in her hand, she is holding a jade dildo that's about this wide, Mike. So she's not just giving him discipline. All right. She's giving him what he needs. This thing was gigantic. Go back and look at the scene.
Okay, well,
it's crazy, man. It is crazy. So that's where and so on this scene, they start cleaning out the brothel. They're cleaning out the guys high on opium. They're cleaning out the people that are the Johns, right, that are participating with the prostitutes. And now the mayor is dressed and he's on his way out.
Right. And if you notice that they're just sort of kicking the white guys out, they're like, all right, get out of here, just get out of here. But they're rounding up the Chinese because they're not interested in real justice. They're just interested in sending a message, as we know.
Yeah. This is a show.
We see that one young Asian man decides to take a stance against the police officer's name. I forget.
Right.
And he pulls a hatchet and the cop pulls a gun on him. And then the young Asian man thinks better of it, puts it down. But the cop doesn't put his gun down.
Nope.
He puts one between his eyes, and then he gives him a real sign of disrespect.
Yeah, like Johnny Sack. Have a drink, scumbag. Yeah. He pisses on the guy. The guy's dead. Ignominiously shoots him, and then of course blames him for coming at him as his excuse for killing the guy. It is an awful scene. The funniest part of this scene is when the mayor's on his way out and the sergeant, one of the cops is on his way up and he says, "Mr. Mayor," and the mayor says, "Sergeant," and he's on his way out of the brothel as if it's business as usual.
Actually, that was funny. What else I think was funny too, and probably darkly funny, was when Lee walked in. He saw the same cop who shot the young man. He saw the dead body there, and he goes, "What happened?" And he goes, "Pulled a weapon on me. I almost pissed myself."
Oh, right. All the other guys are chuckling.
That was darkly funny, but I did find it kind of amusing.
Very, very darkly funny. We now find Bill O'Hara at a Toys, all part of this show of shutting down the brothels, and he's there to arrest and close down a Toys establishment.
Yes, and she has a very different way of handling things. We see that a toy can be physical. We know that. We know that she can handle herself.
Right.
But she also knows how to get things done when it doesn't require. She's a combination of both smart and physical. And here she uses her brain. And she basically she offers him a bribe. She goes, "It'd be better if we were friends, no?" And well, Bill is all too happy to accept the bribe. And once again, right. And I'm sorry, but I hope I don't jump ahead here, but then we see Lee walk in and it occurred to me, is it me? Or is Lee always walking in the middle of some shady shit going down? And he's just like, he's a spoiler. He's ruining everyone's good time.
He's the buzzkill. Lee is, he's the buzzkill of the show. He walks in late when Assam's beating up this guy's outside when he's defending the mayor's wife. He walks in on Bill right here as Bill is doing something underhanded. And you're right. Lee is always he's like the Johnny come lately. But,
he's a buzzkill.
Yeah, he's a buzzkill. He's totally a buzzkill. And yeah, so Bill takes a payoff. A toy says, "Better if we stay friends," and hands him an envelope. And Bill does take the money. And Lee does question him, though, doesn't he?
He does. He goes, "What was that about?" And Bill makes no bones about it. He says, "Yeah, it was a bribe." He goes, "This is the way it is."
Right.
Basically, in essence, boils it down. And I'm of the mindset, and I may have said this last time, that Bill is a conflicted man because he's not entirely a bad person. He's not evil. He's not flat out evil. There is good in him. He's just sort of.
He's gone down the wrong path, Mike. His demons are taking him where he probably wouldn't have gone if he wasn't all wrapped up in the roulette wheel and the cards.
Yeah, and I definitely feel like Bill could be on a better path, and I'm pulling for him that he will be.
Well, for now, he's not, because he justifies taking his payoffs to Lee. And then he tries to turn the tables on Lee by asking him, "Why are you here? Why is someone from Savannah, Georgia here in San Francisco? Can't you be a cop down there?" And of course, that sort of stifles that conversation, doesn't it?
And once again, we see the correlation between Lee and Assam. They really are two sides of the same coin, really, because everyone's asking them both, "Why are you here?" They have been through that this season.
And in some weird way, as you have noted, that Lee is essentially the moral center of the story, Assam is sort of the moral center of the bad guys in a sense, right? We got, although who's the bad guys here, right? Is it the cops or is it the Tongs? That's left up to debate. But Assam is sort of the moral center of his side of the fence, whereas Lee is the moral center of the side of the fence he's on and the overall show.
Yeah, that's a very good point. I never thought of it that way, but yeah, you're right. Assam is probably, for lack of a better word, he's the good gangster. He's the good guy in that world.
Yeah.
And at least you have faith in him that he's not going to do anything real. Like, for instance, when Mei-Ling was holding a knife to a child, and you hope that she wouldn't have actually done it, but then again, maybe she would have. But I can't see Assam doing something like that. So grading on a curve, yeah, he is the moral center, man. And I do believe that. I think that Assam is a moral character.
Well, we now see that moral character, Assam, into entering the mayor's wife's studio. Looks like an art studio, and he's with Jacob, whom she quickly dismisses, and he asks her, why did she send Jacob?
And she wanted to apologize.
Right, for their last meeting, right, where she was a little bit judgy.
Yeah, and she proceeds to give him a little bit of her backstory, and he gives her a little bit more of his backstory. And again, we see that they're really not all that different. He tells her about his grandfather who taught him English, and taught him and his sister about English and about a little bit about America. And she talks about how her relationship with the mayor came to be, and how he first noticed her when she was a little girl. And then as she got old,
it just adds to the creep level of this mayor, doesn't it?
Yeah, yeah. And then she said when she got a little older, he looked at her a little differently. And so again, we see that Penny and Assam's story is not all that different.
I will. I'm sorry, I don't mean to interrupt you, but before I forget it, I want to throw this at you here, Mike, because as Penny wraps up her backstory, she says about the mayor looking at her, and he started looking at her a little differently. She talks about her father's financial troubles. And then she said at some point she made the decision, the mayor started looking at her differently and smiling at her. She said, at some point I made the decision to just smile back. So
yeah, she took one for the team.
She took one for the team. And it reminds me of what her, the public defender said to her last episode when he said, you made your choice.
That's an excellent point.
And there it is. There's her choice. So we have two people who made choices, Assam and Penny, that have them in scenarios that they kind of really don't want to be in. And I think that helps build the tension as Assam's looking at her work and she's sitting closer and she probably smells pretty good, especially for a woman in 1878. And they finally, we thought the kiss was going to happen last week and it didn't, but now it happens.
Oh, yeah. And it's more than a kiss. He got some sticky.
He got some sticky. The first time we see Assam getting sticky because he doesn't participate in the brothels so far.
Well, he's been ensconced in rooms. You haven't seen him in any actual love scenes, but it's implied that
except for Atoy. He did have sex with Atoy.
Yes, we found out, like the mayor, she has varied taste too.
Right. So now we leave Penny and Assam in the throes of bliss. Sticky. And we move on now to a different type of sticky situation, and it's meeting time. It's Mei-Ling and Li Yang sitting across the table from who we quickly find out are the Feng Hai Brain Trust, including a real total slob in the middle of the table over there. I mean, this guy's like stuffing his face. Mei-Ling is talking. He's grunting. He's saying like, really rude things about her being a female, the bitch this. She's still talking. Who wants to hear the bitch talk? Grunt, 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 eat, right?
Yeah, he's a real barbarian. And also, by the way, for old heads like us, we see a familiar face from our youth.
Who was
Dustin
that?
Gwen. Dustin Gwen from 21 Jump Street.
Oh, right. Dustin Gwen is in this scene, right?
Yeah, which I was so excited because I know he's done stuff, but this is the first thing that I really can recall seeing him in since 21 Jump Street.
It's been a long time.
Yeah, and he looks good, by the way. He looks really good. And I was excited just because I used to like that show. That's how I first discovered Johnny Depp. And for those of you who don't know 21 Jump Street, well, I'm sure people know about the movies with Jonah Hill and Channing Tatum, but that was based on a TV show in the 80s. And it was pretty popular. It was geared towards teens like us at the time.
Right.
And we'd watch it after we got off our dinosaurs and got home from school.
It was on some new network that we never heard of called Fox.
Yes.
Amazing,
them
right?
Married with Children, The Simpsons. Well, actually,
Tracy
not even
Ullman
Simpsons,
first.
Tracy Ullman which spawned this. I'm sorry, we're going down the TV rabbit
That's all
hole
right.
here,
Herman's Head. Keep going down the path. Herman's Head. There's a lot of
Herman's
shows on
Head.
that. Yeah.
Oh my God! Well, did I say Married with Children?
You did?
Okay, yeah, Married with Children. Tracy Ullman. That was the original, and there was another show from I don't know.
Yeah, there was X-Files. That was one of their original
Yeah.
hits too. Anyway, we're
Yeah.
digressing, going down Fox memory lane. But the point being, one of the characters in this scene is Dustin Nguyen, who was on 21 Jump Street. And so now Mei-Ling is trying to cut a deal here, but this barbarian, this total Mongol, it ain't listening. He's not having any part of it. And she already had a sense that he wasn't going to have a part of it.
Yeah, which is when she tells him, she says almost pretty much that. She goes, which is why I've already killed you, which is she poisoned him. And it makes me wonder, well, what if he had sat down and said, you know what, I agree. I guess, well, his fate was sealed either way, but
it doesn't matter.
And obviously Dustin Nguyen, who we thought was his aide de camp, well, he was in on it because he assisted in his murder.
He did? Wait a minute. Let's backtrack for a second. All right. So that she says to him, I knew you weren't going to be amenable to a deal, which is why I already killed you. Then we see him like bleeding from his nose, choking, gagging, whatever. And he never makes it across the table really to harm Mei-Ling, because Mei-Ling's like sipping her tea while she's watching this guy gag on whatever she poisoned him in. A fight breaks out. That dude dies. They flip him off the table. And then that's when Dustin Nguyen's character sits down and says, so I hear you have a proposition, right? However, tell me where he helped them.
You didn't get the sense that he was in on it?
Not at all. I just get the sense that he saw his opportunity to step over the guy that was just above him to take over. I thought he just wanted to hear what they had to say, because if he was in on it, he wouldn't ask them about their proposition. He would already know what it was.
Well, in my opinion, there was some sort of side deal or discussion, at least, between Dustin Nguyen and her, or between Hopway and him, because he was not surprised by anything. He was not surprised that he was poisoned. He didn't even blink. And then without even a moment's hesitation, he dispatched the other Feng Hai.
Let's leave that one for debate. I'm not so sure about that, but I'm not going to say you're wrong either, Mike. That'll give me more to ponder, right? Meanwhile, while this is all going on, Chow is like, what the F?
Yeah.
And Li Young explains that I couldn't tell you, we had to do it. And, Chow's like, hey, I got a reputation over here. At least give me some heads up, because when I set up a meeting and half the meeting party doesn't walk out alive, that's on me.
Yeah. And I can understand his point. I feel bad for him, but then he kind of comes back with, or Li Young said, he goes, well, if I had told you, would you have done it? And he says, well, at least I would have charged more.
Which was charged more, he says.
Yeah, that was a humorous line, but I could see his point of view. It kind of ruins his business model, or at least damages his credibility, so to speak.
And Li Yang leaves and says it was a means to an end. And Chow says, whose end?
Yes.
Great line. Leaves the scene hanging right there in sort of that uncertainty, right? And we now cut back from a scene of brutality to pillow talk between Penny and Assam. And she tells him that she never really would have made him out to be a thug.
Yeah, and she's learning more about him. Well, obviously they know each other biblically now, so they have learned about each other, and she's learning about him, and she's like, oh, not all the pieces fit, but he's at the same time he's also learning about her, because in a way, kind of like her, like Lee and Assam, and her and Assam, they're kind of the same in a lot of ways. In their cases, they both had to do things they didn't want to do, and they're both in the situation they didn't necessarily choose.
I'll take it a step further, okay, to draw another parallel. As Penny explains, because this is the scene where she really explains how Blake, her father's friend, Blake, made his move on her, and she made that decision to enter a marriage she didn't want. Very much like Mei-Ling, whose backstory is that she entered a marriage that she did not want. So once again, while these characters are so disparate and different, they are so very much the same, Mike, from class to class and race to race.
Good point.
Yeah.
Good point.
We move back
Yeah,
to the I mean,
I don't disagree.
The writers do a really good job of tying everyone together and making this not a series of different stories, which it is, but a single story with these tightly sewn together parts.
Yeah, it's really great writing.
It truly
I
is.
can't praise the writing enough.
We're now in the police department, and it's showtime again. All of the perps that were arrested at the bust at the brothel are now being paraded for some showboating. Buckley and the mayor and all the various cops. We're hearing talk about the foreign criminal element yet again, and the Chinatown squad's big victory in helping improve the quality of life in our fair city. Mr. Lee doesn't agree, though, does he?
No, and I wanted to just kind of mention this. To me, reminded me of the John Chinaman episode, but this was John Chinaman assembly line. This was in Mass.
Right.
There's a bunch of, and Lee points out something very interesting because they were cutting their hair and say that the emperor requires them to have that. So if you send them back to China with cut hair, you're basically sending them back to a death sentence.
Right, because he said, we'll send them back where they come from. And Lee said something like, not if you cut their hair, you're not. And so he explains what you just shared with us. Lee doesn't want to get in this photo. He sees it for what it is. And he's told, and I'll be blunt, get in the fucking picture, Lee. And he does. And you notice, though, he's in the back of the picture. He's in the back row of the picture, and he's sort of like part of his face is obscured. He doesn't really want to be in this display.
And is it because he doesn't agree with what's going on, or is there something else going on?
I think it's because he doesn't agree with it. He's not agreed with the mistreatment of the Chinese from the get-go, and because he's a little smarter than these guys, he's able to understand a bit better what's going on.
But do you have the feeling and that maybe there's something else going on with Lee?
I mean, there could be. We haven't been fully revealed about him yet, but he is in the back hiding his face, and that's a good point. Mike, it's something I hadn't considered yet, and we'll probably see more about that in future episodes.
Speaking of Lee, though, I wanted to actually backtrack here because there was a quick scene in the beginning there where Lee was in bed sleeping, and he sort of woke up in a dream, and you didn't know what was going on. He had someone next to him who looked like a woman, but you only saw the back of her.
Right.
And it was like a quick dream sequence, I guess, because he woke up and then she wasn't there.
Yeah, you're right. I failed to bring that up when we talked about the sleeping scene. I was more interested in that he was wearing badge number 42 than to even notice the fact that there was a quick shot of someone next to him. And it might have been, let me ask you, do you think that was, we're going way backwards, but was that in his head or reality?
I thought it was a dream. That's how I took it.
Yeah, I agree with that.
He's thinking about someone, and we don't know who yet.
Right.
And I suspect that there was probably a little bit of another thing going on with that photo. I think Lee didn't want to be in it, obviously, because he didn't agree with the handling of the Chinese, but also I think because maybe as a reason he doesn't want to be in a picture. That's just my opinion. That's
a good point. I never thought of that. That hadn't crossed my mind at all. I'm still seeing this guy as just, he's the moral center, and he don't want to be part of this parade. But that could be only part of it. We're now seeing Mr. Buckley, who there's no questioning what his motives are, and he's at a bar. He's having a drink, and he's having a conversation with a guy who is, we find out, the AP reporter, Associated Press reporter, and Buckley is paying him off in return for an anti-Chinese article to be printed across the newswire.
On a side note too, I also enjoy these historical references like AP in the 19th century. We mentioned Pinkerton before.
Right.
These things that are real life. I like the real life element that they're throwing in there.
Yeah, same here. And I agree with you. And I was like, ooh, AP, I guess that was a thing all the way back in 1878.
I'm gonna assume they were. I know the New York Times has been publishing for 150 years or two, or whatever it is. Yeah, so that's pretty cool to get those little dabs, little drips of actual real life history in here and there. That's also another little, I don't know if it's an Easter egg, but I found it pretty cool. I was like,
I like that. I'm with you. I like that kind of stuff too. We're now outside of Penny's place. Assam, it's nighttime now. It was daytime when he went there. It's nighttime now. And he steps out of Penny's onto the street, and there's a horse-drawn carriage across the street, and we hear Mei-Ling, get in, she says.
Yeah, and she likes to have a lot of clandestine meetings and carriage, doesn't she? That's like her. That's like her.
It's weird. She does conduct her meetings in the carriages, but how about this, Mike? How did she know to be outside Penny's waiting for him?
That's a really good point. I'm going to go ahead and assume that she just was following him and keeping tabs on him.
Somehow, some way, she's got her sights on him all the way. So I guess that's how she kept tabs on him. Maybe Jacob's a rat.
Could be.
Yeah.
It's one of those things that they haven't answered yet, and I'm okay with that. But leaving that as an open question, I'll draw my own conclusion until I find out conclusively on that one. But I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
I was going to say it's kind of funny that his secret about Penny didn't last very long. Did it?
It lasted as long as he did, if you know what I'm saying. And Mei-Ling summarizes it very succinctly when he gets in the carriage. They have a very tense conversation, and she says to him in no uncertain terms, "Since you've been here, you've joined my enemy. You've been arrested, and now you're fucking the mayor's wife." And it's an amazing,
not just any duck, but the mayor's wife.
Right. Not just any duck lady, but the mayor's wife, right? And so again, it's a very tense conversation. And this is where she says to him, you got to get going. You're out of here. Here's your passage back to China. And she hands him, I guess, what is, a boat ticket, boat fare, right? To head home. And he says, I'm not going without you. He really wants to take her back home. You could see it. Mike, when he said to her, I'm not going without you. Okay. I saw him not as Assam, the man who is kicking people's butt, but right there in that moment, I saw him as like a 12-year-old kid wanting his big sister.
That's a really interesting point. And the scene was definitely kind of a little, I dare say, sweet.
It was. He cares about her. They care about each other.
And that might have been one of the few, I'd say, genuinely sweet moments in the show so far. And it adds another layer to this, which I thought was pretty cool. And then he proceeds to sort of apologize for not protecting her from her past, from her husband, from her, what we presume is sexual assault or some level of sexual
just abuse
assault.
overall, right? Xing Yang was his name. Totally abused her. He does tell her he regrets not fighting to save her, but she tells him, listen, we're going to war here in Chinatown. Don't be on the wrong side.
Yeah, she's trying to protect him. They're both trying to protect each other. And I thought it was a genuine, sweet sibling moment. He apologizes. She's trying to protect him.
He rips up the ticket.
He rips up the ticket.
Oops.
Yeah. He's not going anywhere. He's bullheaded. He's going to stay right there with his sister.
That's correct. So that's the end of that scene. Assam doesn't want to leave without his sister. She says, get going. Otherwise, you're going to end up dead. But again, does this guy listen to anybody, Mike? We're 4 episodes in. I haven't seen him take a single piece of advice yet.
Well, last episode, when we were talking about how everyone was telling him to kind of smarten up, in the end, he kind of said to Penny that he implied he learned his lesson about smartening up. So that was one time when like 4 people came at him that he did listen, but I guess it takes multiple people to hit the same point, maybe.
I don't know. It was a really good scene though. The scene ends. We're now at a bar. It's Bill. He's having a drink, and in walks Lee.
And it actually kind of reminded me of the previous scene in the carriage because there was a little bit of bonding going on here, and there was an apology too, because Lee apologized to O'Hara for sort of second guessing,
overstepping his bounds.
Yeah.
And let me ask you something though. Did you find that as genuine by Lee? Because for me, I was like, all right, is he just apologizing to end this and keep moving forward, but not really believing he did wrong? Because I got the sense that it was sort of obligatory.
At this point, I'm willing to take Lee on his word. I think he's a genuine person. So I think if he apologizes, I think he means it. So far, he's shown himself to be honest, genuine, I dare say even warm. He's thorough.
Right.
So I'm going to take him on his word on this one. I'm going to say that he really, I don't know if he was trying to bond with O'Hara, but just sort of like, hey, he's man enough to admit when he's wrong. That's how I took it.
Right. You could be right. And you make the point that they are bonding here. Understanding each other a little bit. I mean, Bill even gives Lee some encouragement. He says, you're a good cop. Just keep your head down because there's like 100 different ways this gig can bury you. Do you understand? And Lee says, yes, I do. And Bill's response was, no, you don't. It's a great scene. I like the line. I'll go backwards for a second. When Lee first walks in, Bill's having a drink, and Bill says to him, are you too high and mighty or whatever it was to have a drink? And Lee says, no. And he goes, I'm the only hell my mama raised, he said. So I don't know if I believe that, but they do drink it out together during the scene. But then Bill wraps it up and says, I got to go. I have an appointment.
And it's with a gambling table.
Again, he's at a table. He sits down and he reaches into his pocket and he pulls out how much?
Well, I assume it was the amount that a toy gave him.
$30, the equivalent of about $1,200. So he had the majority of his debt in his hand to Jack Damon, that debt from earlier in the episode. And instead, he sits down on a table and he's playing cards here, right?
The tragic folly of an addictive gambler.
When he gets the cards and he picks them up, the first thing I said was, Bill's got no poker face. And that's why he's such a shitty gambler, because you knew he had good cards when he picked them up, Mike. The way his eyes gleamed, you knew he had good cards. And that's how the episode ends.
And what a way to end it, too. That was a great ending.
Same way it started, right? Bill's at the tables. He loses. Now he's
circled back.
Tables. What a circle. And listen, we don't see it, but we know how this specific trip to the gambling hall is going to end for Bill, too.
Yeah, it's not going to end well. And no. I have a feeling we're going to see more of Mr. Damon, and I'm curious as to how that plays out.
Well, Bill's going to have to come up with $50 in a couple of short weeks. So it's going to be time to pay the piper, to lack of a better term. But that is a wrap on what was just another great episode, which I love how they reveal these characters to us in these subtle reveals where it's just like little pieces at a time so that we're left guessing about them while we're learning about them.
Yeah, and it keeps you hooked. And the way they set it up, like you said, they're sort of dangling the carrot at us. And you're like, oh, okay, who's this person? I mean, I'm really curious about Jack Damon now, because he's kind of a unique character. So now we got Jack Damon and we got Dustin Gwen.
Yep.
And I'm curious as to where that's going to go. Dustin Gwen, his character, Feng Hai, looks like he can handle himself in a scrap.
Yep.
So I'm really curious how this is going to go. And plus, there's the relationship between the Feng Hai and Long Zi. So,
and where's Assam and Penny going to go now, too? Like, does that relationship have any legs, or is this sort of like a one-nighter or what? We're going to find out about that. Will the mayor continue to head back to his places of pleasure, literally and figuratively? And also, what's going to happen with the situation between Mei-Ling and Assam? So there's a lot of stuff that is in the works for the short term as well as the long term of Warrior. But that's a wrap for this week. If you're enjoying this show, please like and subscribe, follow our channel, spread the word, tell your friends, because we're having a lot of fun, and we think that anyone who likes Warrior will enjoy this as well.
Yes, please do. And we look forward to your comments, your questions. Please chime in, whatever you want to say. All comments are welcome.
We'll see you next week for season 1, episode 5 of Warrior. Until then, adios.